Okay, look. So two things are supposed to come together tonight. One is, I guess, less relevant if the girls that were in the class all year aren't here. I don't know how I'm going to handle that, but just to fill you in, I mentioned this briefly last week, but we were learning all year long the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, of which the last two are Mashiach and Tchiyat HaMetim. We spent a lot of time on those after Pesach. And the whole class was about, in general, what we believe, what we don't believe, and what challenges we have with faith and things of that nature. At the beginning of the year, everybody agreed, pe'echad, that the most difficult thing if I give you the list of the Rambam's 13 principles, the most difficult thing for people to accept is the idea that the Mashiach is really going to come. And what I said to them at the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, and also last week, and tonight I want to elaborate on it, is that for me, and I only realized this also like in one of the last classes we had before Shavuot, for me, this is actually the easiest one to believe in. And it's the reason that I'm so confident that I can say I believe in everything else also. I'm going to try to explain why that is. But put that aside for a minute. And the other thing is the following. This three-part series, of which this is supposed to be part 2, is meant to be examining the question of, okay, if Mashiach does come, or when Mashiach comes, how are we going to know that Mashiach's here? Now, background to this is a fundamental, I mentioned this last week, so I'm not going to go into it again, but just to state it, a fundamental disagreement of opinion between the Rambam and many other Rishonim who came before him and after him. At one point, maybe the Rambam was perhaps the only one who said what he said, but because he's the Rambam, because he had such influence today, a lot of people think this way. But there are those who view the Yemot HaMashiach as something miraculous, spontaneous, the way they present it to you when you were little kids. We're going to hear a shofar blow, and we're going to suddenly be transported to Yerushalayim, and the Beit HaMikdash is going to come down from Shamayim. If that's the type of Yemot HaMashiach you believe in, and there were Rishonim that it seemed believed that, then the question we're dealing with right now is much less relevant. When that happens, you'll know. And if that hasn't happened, you'll know. If, however, we take a more Maimonidean, a more Rambam approach, that the Yemot HaMashiach is something that's supposed to happen slowly and in a natural way, then it becomes much more tricky. The Rambam himself addresses this point. I'm not going to show the Rambam again. We did it last week. But the Rambam talks about no less a person than Rabbi Akiva, who was convinced that the Mashiach had come in the person of Bar Kokhba. And it turned out that Bar Kokhba was not the Mashiach. And the Rambam even gives us rules of what to do when we think Mashiach is coming. Okay, that's the background. Now, this three-part series is meant to analyze two contemporary movements, one of which we did last week, and the other one we're going to talk about tonight and next week, that actually say that, no, I don't think anyone can say that the Mashiach is completely here in the sense that the prophecies of Yemot Mashiach have not yet been fulfilled. Even Lahavdil, even the Christians who say the Mashiach already came, have to talk about a second coming because according to them he came, but he didn't finish the job. Right? So nobody can actually say until the prophecies of Yeshayahu of peace on earth and all these other things are complete. So then no one can say the Mashiach, Yemot Mashiach are completely here. But there are at least two groups who claim that we are living in what can already be called, if not Yemot Mashiach, or the beginnings of Yemot Mashiach, or something like that. So the one group we spoke about last week were those who make this claim about the Lubavitcher Rebbe Zichrono Livracha. We spoke about that last week. I'm not going to go back to that either. Tonight and next week, God willing, I want to talk about a different group, which makes a claim which in some ways is very, very different than the claim that's made by those Lubavitchers who speak about the Rebbe that way. In some ways very, very different, and in other ways not so different, or even very similar. I'm talking about many components within the religious Zionist community. Not all religious Zionists make this claim, but many, particularly those who have been influenced by Rav Kook and by both Rav Kooks, meaning the father and the son, by Rav Avram Kook, who's the famous Rav Kook, and also by his son Rav Tzvi Yehuda, make the claim that the Mashiach is coming now, and that we are not at the end of the process, because you can't say that, but that we are. Rav Tzvi Yehuda, you know Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook was the famous Rav Kook that you see all the pictures of, etc. He died in 1937, I believe, 38, somewhere around there. He never saw the state of Israel. His son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, died in the 1970s. He saw the state of Israel. He also saw the Six-Day War and its aftermath. And so he developed those ideas and really, really, made this claim in a much stronger way. And personally, I'm very, very personally convinced that this approach is correct. That we really are living in what can be called, I started to say, Tzvi Yehuda used the term that he borrowed from the Gemara Megillah. He used the term Atchalta de Geula, the beginnings of the redemption. I'm not even sure he used that term decades ago. I'm not even sure that term is relevant any longer. I'm not sure we should be speaking about Atchalta any longer. I think we should be talking about Bi'itzuma shel Hagula, and in the throes of the Geula. I recognize, and I want you to hear also, that this position, although I'm convinced it's correct, I'm telling you on the table, I'm convinced it's correct. It's not clear, and there are definitely other viewpoints, and I can defend those other viewpoints also. So what I decided to do is the following. Tonight, I do not intend to be objective. I intend to be objective. I do not intend to be balanced. I'm going to try to convince you that the Mashiach is here. I'll tell you things the way I see it. Next week, we'll analyze it a little bit more from both sides. Okay? So let me start with the following. Now, I don't remember exactly. Eliza, you were in TVA 2 years ago? The year before Esther? 3 years ago already, Gilu. Maya, you're the same year as Eliza? When you were on kibbutz, I took you on a tiyul to a place near the Kinneret where you saw a movie and you heard about how the kibbutz movement was started and all that. Esther, we went there, right? You don't even remember, maybe? Okay, my point is this. Okay, did we do a tiyul first? Okay, let me show you a picture. The reason I'm asking, I'm going to describe something that I did on a TVA tiyul a few years ago. I'm not sure if either of you were there, okay? Because I don't remember what year it was. But I've used this example many times to the point that I actually have a PowerPoint that I made to use. I used it in America when I was spoken a shul for Shabbos. Remember, you used to be able to fly on an airplane and go places? So it seems like a lifetime ago, but it was just a few months ago I was in America. I spent the Shabbat as a scholar in residence in Pittsburgh, and they asked me to speak about it. They were supposed to, that shul in Pittsburgh, I was supposed to be running a trip for them this coming fall. And part of the reason I went for Shabbat was kind of to promote the trip, which unfortunately has been postponed for about a year. I hope it'll happen a year later. But anyway, I made a whole PowerPoint about learning Torah in Eretz Yisrael, and I'm going to show you a piece of that PowerPoint. Hello, Aviva. So let me show you this here. Okay. Maya and Eliza, by any chance, does that view look at all slightly familiar? I don't know if you were there, and if you were there, I don't know if you remember, so don't just make me feel good and say yes, but if you have some memory, okay. I did not take this picture. I found this picture on the internet, but because I didn't think to take a picture at the time, and my camera probably isn't as good as the camera that was used for this picture. But this picture is taken from approximately, maybe the exact spot, maybe approximately where I was standing with a bunch of TVA girls a couple of years ago when they were in kibbutz. And we saw approximately this view. Anyone know what you're looking at? What that scene is? Where in Israel that is? Okay, I think Very good. The Kinneret. Now, if you want to get a little bit sharper, this is already a higher level. Can you tell me what part of the Kinneret? You don't have to be able to get this. You're not a tour guide.
Is that the southern part?
Excellent, Lisa. Yes, the southern part. We're standing on the southwestern part of the Kinneret. Opposite us is the southern part of the Golan Heights. Tveria is off camera to the east. You can't see Tveria from here, but if you would go down to the road or into the lake and you take a car or a boat and make a left turn from here, and if you were in a car on the road that's right by the Kinneret, drive another 10 minutes, you'd be in Tveria. That's where we are. Below us is this place called Chatzar Kinneret, where I like to take the TVA girls, right next to Degania, which was the first kibbutz. We go there during kibbutz. Okay. I'm not going to relate to the pasuk that's on the screen here, and that was related to my PowerPoint that I'm not going to talk about now. And the slogan, Am Levadad Yishkon, below the picture, also I'm not going to talk about now. But I want you to look at that picture, because that's approximately what you see. We saw the lake. Around the lake, you see various small towns and farms. This is what's called Kfutzat Kinneret. Below it is Chatzar Kinneret. You see part of Degania. On the other side of the lake, you have Ein Gev. On top, on the Golan, you have Bnei Yehuda. You see trees. You see fields. You can't see it in this picture, but you see cars driving and trucks on the road. You might even see boats on the lake. V'chule. And I told the girls, as we were looking at this scene, that approximately 150 years ago, if we were standing right here, we would have seen something very different. I don't have a photograph from 150 years ago. I have a photograph from not much later than that, maybe 120 years ago, which I'll show you in a minute. But I don't have a photograph from 150 years ago. But I know pretty much exactly what it looked like then, because a certain group of people came here. The year, I believe, was 1869. And the people who came here at that time were Americans, Christians. And this was kind of a famous journey because it was the first time that a steamship had sailed across the Atlantic Ocean from the United States. And a group of people were on this boat who were going on a tour. Some people consider this the beginning of the modern tourist industry in the Middle East. These people spent a couple of years on a trip across the whole Mediterranean, and the main goal of the trip, the climax, was to come to the Holy Land, Eretz Yisrael, which at that time was run by the Ottomans. And we know a lot about this because one guy on the boat was kind of famous. His name was Samuel Clemens, otherwise known by his pen name, which is?
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain. Yeah, here's a picture of him. Okay. Now, Mark Twain wrote a book about this trip. In the beginning, he was a newspaper guy, right? He, I think they paid for the trip, and every week he sent an article back to the paper describing this trip, and eventually all these articles were put together in a book called Innocents Abroad, which describes this whole journey. And what you see in front of you are some excerpts. I read this to the girls, describing what he saw. Now, you have to understand something. These people were Christians. There were actually two groups of people on the boat. They were like really frum Christians who were on a religious pilgrimage. And then there were the not so frum ones who were more like tourists, who were Christians, like they're not deniers, but they mainly came for the trip. Mark Twain was in the second group. They entered Eretz Yisrael from the north, from Syria. What's today Syria anyway. Which means when a Christian comes to Israel, there are a number of places he wants to go. A Christian wants to go to Yerushalayim, just like Lahavdil, a Jew does. A Christian wants to go to Beit Lechem. A Christian wants to go to Nazareth. A Christian also wants to go to the Kinneret. There's a lot of the stories in the New Testament supposedly happened on the Kinneret. And this was the first, call it holy site for them that they actually got to. And the Christians, particularly the really religious ones, were extremely emotional that they're going to see what they call the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus supposedly walked on water and all of that. And Mark Twain gets there. Now, he's a very sarcastic guy. He also wrote in 19th century English, so we might have to translate this a little bit. But let's just look at what he says here. The celebrated Sea of Galilee is not so large a sea as Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe is in Nevada. Apparently, he had spent some time there. I thought he lived in Nevada, but when I spoke in Pittsburgh, some man came over to me afterwards and told me I was wrong. He lived in New York, I think. Jersey or something, somewhere on the East Coast. I guess I was wrong about that. But anyway, apparently he liked Lake Tahoe. It's just as 2/3 as large. And when we come to speak of beauty, this sea is no more to be compared to Tahoe than a meridian of longitude is to a rainbow. That's sarcastic 19th century English that if I want to translate into 21st century Brooklyn talk, it basically comes out like this. You call this a lake? This is not a lake. This is barely a puddle. This is a poor excuse for a lake. The dim waters of this pool cannot suggest the limpid brilliance of Tahoe. These low, shaven, yellow hillocks of rock and sand devoid of perspective, unpeopled deserts, rusty mounds of barrenness. He talks about the melancholy ruin of Capernaum, Kfar Nachum. It's a place important to Christians, which was just a ruin at that time. And you've all been to Tveria, I assume? You know the city that we call Tveria today? It goes all the way up the mountain. He calls it the stupid village of Tiberias, slumbering under its 6 funereal plumes of palms. In plain English, they got to the Kinneret, and they found nothing. A tiny little lake, which still isn't very big, surrounded by barren, gray desert, that's what he calls it, with nothing there except one stupid village, he calls it, which had a total of 6 trees in it. I didn't put it on the screen, but elsewhere he also acknowledges that across the lake from Tveria, there was also one other tree. And that's it. And he says, this is the Sea of Galilee that we read about in the Bible? This is pathetic. Now, my teacher, Rav Yoel Binun, points out that when Mark Twain came here, whether he knew it or not, and maybe he could have because he was a Christian who knew the Bible, that he was fulfilling a nevuah from the Torah. These are psukim from Dvarim. We'll come back to this section of Dvarim a little bit later on, where the Torah talks about what's going to happen to Eretz Yisrael in the future. It talks about how Eretz Yisrael is going to become, Am Yisrael is going to go into Galut. This is Moshe Rabbeinu talking, Sefer Dvarim. Moshe Rabbeinu talking before he died. People are about to go into Eretz Yisrael. They're going to conquer the land. But he's warning them that if they sin at least, this is what's going to happen. Eventually, their children are going to go into Galut, and the land is going to be destroyed. And then he says, "Ve'amar hador ha'acharon b'neichem asher yakumu me'acharechem." After you, a generation will come, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. They will say the following, Ve'hanochri asher yavo me'eretz rechoka. And the Gentile that comes from a faraway land will come. Vira'u et makot ha'aretz hahi ve'et tachaluea. And they will see what has happened to this land. Asher chila Hashem, by the way, Hashem has afflicted and destroyed the land. Gofrit v'melach tzreifach olaksa. Lo tizara v'lo tatzmiach. They're going to see a land that's as if it was burnt and destroyed, nothing growing. Kimapechat Sdom v'Amorah. Adma v'tzvoim asher afach Hashem ba'apol v'chamato. It's going to look like Sdom v'Amorah after Hashem destroyed it. The whole land's going to look like that. V'amru kol hagoyim, and they're all going to say, Al me'asa Hashem kach al haaretz hazot. Mechori ha'af hagadol. They're going to say, what happened here? Says Rav Yoel Binun. Mark Twain fulfilled this nevuah. The Torah says, a Nochri, a Gentile, is going to come, Me'eretz Rechoka, from far away. You say, what happened here? This is what he said. And according to the Torah, he's going to answer the question. And by the way, Mark Twain also did elsewhere in his book. I didn't put it on the screen, but elsewhere in the book, he makes a comment like this, at least once. He makes a comment like this also. Vamru, they're going to answer the question. You know what happened to this land? It's because of what they did, because they violated God's covenant. So look, the Torah said, you're going to sin, or if you sin anyway, the Torah said you're going to go into exile, and the land is going to be destroyed. And one day a goy is going to come and say, what happened to this place? This picture was taken not in 1869 when Mark Twain was here. This picture was taken sometime in the 1880s. You see a little, this is Chatzar Kinneret, the place that I took you on TVA, where they were training people who became the first kibbutznikim later. Okay, you see here a few of their houses that they had built. Over here, the very beginnings of the Ganya. But even this wasn't here when Mark Twain was here. And the rest of the place still looks pretty much like what he described. Pretty much nothing. Here's one field that these people had planted. This is already the beginnings of something. Then I pulled out the book of Yechezkel. And I read the following nevuah. Yechezkel HaNavi, let's just put ourselves in the right historical context. Yechezkel HaNavi lived at the exact same time as Yirmiyahu HaNavi. Two Nevi'im who lived at the very end of what we call Tkufat Bayit Rishon. They were both Kohanim who were in Yerushalayim before the destruction at the very end of the first Beit HaMikdash, the first Beit HaMikdash. If you remember from Sefer Malachim or from Sefer Yirmiyahu or from Sefer Divrei Hayamim, if you happen to have learned it. So there was, when the Nebuchadnezzar, when the Bavlim, Bavel, when they destroyed Yerushalayim, they took us into exile in a few waves, not all at once. And there was an exile during the time of the king Yehoiachim, 2 kings before the end, where some of the people were taken to Bavel. Yechezkel was taken with them. So Yirmiyahu remained in Yerushalayim, and Yechezkel was already in Bavel. And he's talking, he has nevuot before the Churban, and then he has nevuot after the Churban. This nevuot is already after the Churban. Yechezkel is sitting in Bavel. He knows from nevuah that Yerushalayim has been destroyed, that the whole land has been destroyed, that the people have been taken to exile. Maybe they haven't arrived yet in Bavel, but they're on their way, or maybe they have arrived. And he gets a prophecy. V'ata ben Adam. Yechezkel is called Ben Adam. Hashem comes to him and he says, Hinavei el harei Yisrael, speak to the mountains. Ve'amarta, and say to them, Harei Yisrael, shim'u dvar Adonai. Oh, talk to the mountains, poetically, of course, and tell the mountains of Israel, hear the word of God. I know, says God, that the nations of the world will laugh at you. They conquered you. They destroyed you. They feel that they've inherited you, that you belong to them, and that they are going to rejoice. And tell them. And I didn't put all the psukim here. Tanakh. I'll just read you a little more than what's on the screen here. I didn't realize I would have gotten it up on the screen. Chezkel Lamed Vav. He says to them, Ko Amar Hashem Elokim Leharim v'lagvaot la'afikim v'legeayot. Say, Yechezkel, to the mountains. The mountains and the valleys, v'lecharavot hashomamot, and the abandoned ruins, v'le'arim ha'ne'azavot, and the cities that are empty. Talk to the destroyed land of Israel and say to it, Asher ayu lelag u'lesherit hagoyim asher misaviv, that the nations around have mocked and laughed at and feel that they have conquered. Tell those mountains the following: mountains and valleys and ruins. I'm going to come with my fury against those nations. I'm going to punish them. I've spoken with fury and anger. I know that you have suffered the the humility of those nations. And tell them, But you should know, Hine nasati at yadi, I raised my hand, says God, as an oath, and I swear, the day will come, the day will come when those nations around you, they will suffer their own humiliation. And now the key pasuk, which is on the screen here. Vatem hare Yisrael, and you, O mountains that are currently desolate and destroyed, said Yechezkel, Anpechem titenu, uperyechem tis'u, give branches again, give fruit again. La'ami Yisrael ki kervu lavo, because the day will come when my children are going to come home. Says the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin, Ein lecha ketz megule mizeh. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, if you want to know what's the clearest sign Mashiach is coming very soon, when this pasuk in Yechezkel is fulfilled. When you see the mountains of Israel that are desolate, when you see them give fruit again, it means the Mashiach is coming. And Yechezkel tells us, why is that so? Why is it that trees and fruit should be the symbol that Mashiach is coming? He tells you why. Le'ami, you see my pointer, right? Le'ami Yisrael ki kervu lavo. Give fruit for my people, because my people are going to come home. In other words, Am Yisrael is meant, Eretz Yisrael is meant for Am Yisrael. When Am Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael, then Eretz Yisrael gives fruit. When Am Yisrael goes to exile, then the land has no reason to do anything. Then the land becomes desolate. And the land remains desolate until Am Yisrael is ready to come home. When it's getting time for Am Yisrael to come home, the land's going to wake up again. So says Yechezkel. And he continues, not just land, not just trees. Verbeiti alechem adam, kol beit Yisrael kulo. I'm going to bring people back to live on you. All of Am Yisrael is going to come home to Eretz Yisrael. V'noshvu he'arim, ve'acheravot tirbanana. And those cities that were destroyed, they're going to be settled again. And those ruins are going to be rebuilt. Verbeiti alechem adam uvehema, v'ravu paru, v'oshavti etchem kikadmotechem, v'tivoti mereshitot merishotechem midatem kenyashem. So what you see here is the beginnings of the fulfillment of this pasuk. Mark Twain came 20 years before this pasuk, and he saw nothing. And he laughed at it. He mocked it, just like the Torah said. And a few people came back, just like the Torah said they would. Or here in this case, like the Navi said they would. They built a few houses, and they planted some fields with great difficulty, and you've heard the stories, the malaria and all the problems. But then more people came, and more people came. First aliyah, second aliyah, etc. And this is what you have today. You're seeing, to me at least, it's very clear, you're seeing this nevuah. Take a nevuah from 150 years ago. Take the photo that I gave you and the description from 20 years before the photo when we don't have a photo yet. And you see that nevuah fulfilled. Open your eyes and see this nevuah fulfilled. And then we can go through history. Right here, I did a whole thing about Jewish history, how you can travel around Israel and you can see the whole story. I'm not going to go through all of this now, but those who are on Shivat Zion trip with me were in a few of these places. That's Alon Bodeh by Alon Shvut. This place you all recognize. Yerushalayim that was destroyed. Yechezkel talked about ruins being rebuilt because our children are coming home. So I want to read these psukim here, but I want to read these psukim in greater depth. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I want to get the whole thing up on the screen. The end of Dvarim, which we started reading before, I want to look at it now in a little bit greater detail. Give me one second. I'm just, I should have, I guess I can share the screen while I'm doing this. Okay. I want to go just a little bit deeper into this and explain to you why both things I said at the outset of this class tonight, or this morning for you, or afternoon, are both, to me, they come together as one. I told you that to me, and I said tonight I'm not being balanced or I'm telling you only one side. We'll get to the other side next week. But to me, it's clear that Mashiach is coming, and the process is well underway. And I told you that not only is the belief in the Mashiach not difficult for me, but it's the reason I can believe in everything else. Now, the reason it's not hard for me to believe the Mashiach is coming is because I don't have to believe the Mashiach is going to come in the future. I'm seeing it in front of my eyes, according to my understanding, anyway. If I lived 200 years ago, I lived in the time of Mark Twain 150 years ago, then I might have agreed with my students who told me that believing that the Mashiach is going to come is such a hard thing to believe. But we have the privilege to live in a time. I don't understand why it's hard to believe it. Open your eyes. If you're in Israel, if you've been in Israel, open your eyes and look out the window. You see Mashiach. So let's go a little deeper into this. Look, I'm a student of history. Not always in my life has Jewish history interested me. Only since I was in college. In high school, I hated it. But I got very interested in it in college, NYU. I wound up doing a master's degree in it. And I wound up later on, of course, getting involved in becoming a tour guide, etc., which is also connected to that. When you look at the history of the Jewish people, objectively, it makes absolutely no sense. Those of you who are on Shivat Zionship, and I don't remember which of you that is, might be only Aviva. Right? Okay, so I did a whole thing on Shivat Zionship, like I said. So the history of the Jewish people doesn't make any sense, objectively. A nation in the ancient world that inhabited a certain piece of land that was eventually conquered by the mighty empire. Let's go back to the days of the first Beit HaMikdash. Ashur, Bavel, they conquered the whole Middle East. All the nations that you read about in the time of the Tanakh, which we know about also from outside the Tanakh, were destroyed by Ashur and Bavel. Moab, Ammon, the Plishtim, Aram, all these nations were they're gone. They disappeared. Ashur came and Bavel came and they just conquered everybody, sent everybody into exile. It wasn't just us, that's what they did. And those nations just assimilated with each other, which was exactly what Ashur and Bavel wanted. And they're gone. I mean, may have biological descendants that are still alive, but they're gone as nations. And Israel somehow managed to hold on in Bavel to their identity, managed to come back, eventually build a second Beit HaMikdash and everything else, lived another couple of hundred years in their homeland, but eventually, again, the second Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. Romans, we're not going into all the details, but eventually we go into exile a second time, and the second time is not like the first time. The first exile in Bavel, the entire, whatever was left after the Aseret HaShvatim were gone, but the people that were taken from Yehuda were taken to Bavel, and they stayed in one general vicinity in Bavel. And a relatively short time later, 2 generations, 70 years, they were, even after 50 years already, they were able to come back. The second Galut was much different. Thousands of years. All over the world. And persecuted almost everywhere. It makes no sense that Am Yisrael should survive. It makes no sense. But we did. And what happens after we survive for a couple of thousand years and we come back home, that makes even less sense. After saying after thousands of years in exile, we decide, oh, you know what, it's time to go back home. Let's just do it. Think of Herzl, think of those before Herzl said things like this. Yeah, we should go back to Eretz Yisrael. We really need our own country. What do you mean you need your own country? First of all, none of you have any power of any sort. Second of all, none of you have had your own country for thousands of years. No, you don't know how to be farmers, almost none of you. You don't know how to be soldiers. You don't know how to do any of the things you need to run a country. And you're all over the world. Your cultures are completely different. You can't even speak the same language. And the land that you consider your ancient homeland is ruled by an empire that's ruled it at this point for 300 years and has no interest in letting you do what you want to do. Neither does anybody else in the world have any interest in helping you to promote this thing. And you all say, no, that's okay. We're going to do it anyway. And then we did. And then we did. We came back from all over the world. We figured out how to speak our ancient language again. That's never been done in human history on a national scale. And we built a country and an economy and an army, and we're still coming home all the time. The numbers are growing and growing and growing. We're almost at 50% now. A milestone at some point. Hope no one knows exactly when. The predictions are somewhere in the next 10 to 20 years at the latest. We're going to cross, today it's about 45% of the Jews in the world are in Eretz Israel. And if you look at the Jews below a certain age, if you look at those below the age of 30 or something like that, it's a much, much higher percentage. It's the only place in the world also where there's more Jews being born every year than dying every year. Am Yisrael's coming home. And the fact that that happened is amazing enough. But what's really important is that the Torah told us, the Torah and the Nevi'im, but here I'm showing you the Torah itself, Sefer Dvarim, exactly, and I mean exactly, this was going to happen. This is the end of Sefer Dvarim, not far from the psukim that I showed you earlier. In one of two passages that are known as Tochacha. Okay, there's one at the end of Vayikra, Parshat Bechukotai, and the other one at the end of Dvarim, Parshat Nitzavim and Kitavo. And where they basically, both of these passages, and there's a whole machlokas among the Mefarshim to understand why we have two and what the relationship between the two are. Are they talking about the same thing? Are they talking about different points in history? And whatever, however you understand that, not for now. But the point is, in these two places, the Torah itself lays out for us the plan of Jewish history. And I want to say something else before we read this. I just want you to understand something. You know, we believe that the Torah was given on Har Sinai, or at least was given to Moshe Rabbeinu approximately 3,500 years ago. On university campus, you may have been in classrooms where you may have heard professors contest that. I'm sure you're aware the academic community generally believes that the Torah was not given by God, of course, and it was not written by one person, and it's 4 different documents, and it was not written according to them 3,500 years ago. It's much, 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 much later than that, at least parts of it, particularly the book of Dvarim. But I just want to point out that those professors who tell you that will contest my claim that the Torah was given 3,500 years ago. They will tell you it was written only 2,800 years ago. But everybody agrees that at least 2,800 years ago, these words existed. And we have copies of them that go back 2,000, Dead Sea Scrolls, 2,200 years. That no one can deny. And now, I want you to see how the Torah basically reads like a history book. It's a very lengthy passage. It starts with, we're not going to read it, we're going to skim, we're going to read only a few parts. But it starts with, Vaya im shamo tishma b'kol Hashem Elokecha. If you follow the mitzvot, then all kinds of great things will happen. Everything will be wonderful. And then we'll skip the wonderful stuff. And then, im lo tishma, if you don't listen. So then, and you violate the laws. So then, uvav alecha kol haklalot ha'ela. Then you're going to start to get curses. And there's all kinds of curses here. Me'ira, mihuma, mig'era. These are various types of diseases, perhaps. Dever. Epidemics, maybe. And maybe we can relate to a little bit. Talks here about famine and drought. Enemies attacking us. Basically a catalog of all sorts of terrible things, which again, every word of this has happened more than once in Jewish history already. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I want to skip towards the end. But you're welcome to read it. If you want, take a look at the end of Vayikra, first of all. Not the very end, Parshat Bechukotai, not the last chapter, which is kind of a postscript that talks about the Erechim. From the beginning of Parshat Bechukotai until the end of that section. I think it's 1 or 2 prakim. You can read that. And you can read Dvarim Perek 28 to 30. Chaf Ketz Alam. I'm going to skim it with you right now. So here. Let's start with it from Okay. Let's start from here. V'yifla Hashem et matkotcha v'et makot zarecha makot gedolot v'nemor v'cholaim ra'im v'nemanim. Terrible things will happen to you and to your children. Kol chali v'chol makah. All sorts of sicknesses and afflictions. V'nish'artem b'mtei ma'at. Tachat asher hayitem kekochvei hashamayim larov. The Torah says you're going to become a very tiny people. Avram was promised he's going to have descendants, kekochvei hashamayim, like the stars in the sky. You're going to become a very small people. That's a curse, but it's a curse that contains within it a blessing. Right? Because it says, V'nishartem b'mtei ma'at, you shall remain a tiny people. But included in that is the word, V'nishartem, you shall remain. Meaning you will suffer all sorts of horrors. And because of those horrors, you will become a diminished people. You'll become very small and only a few of you. But you will never be wiped out. You will always remain. And then it says, Ve'hefitzcha Hashem b'chol ha'amin. God will scatter you among all the nations. Miktzei ha'aretz ve'ad kitzei ha'aretz. From one end of the world to the other. And in modern language, that means you will assimilate there. Here it talks about you will serve their gods. Again, that makes no sense. A nation that's scattered onto every corner of the earth doesn't maintain its identity. It disappears. But the Torah said, you will be scattered, you will be persecuted everywhere, you will try to assimilate. And then we'll see why, one of the reasons why we weren't able to assimilate. It says you're going to worship foreign gods. But it's not going to work. V'nish artem, you shall remain. And girls, this nevuah was also fulfilled. I have somewhere a map of all the countries in the world and the Jewish population of each country today. There are countries in the world today that have almost no Jews in them. But those countries, it's only because they drove us out a long time ago. There isn't a country on earth, I said this once, and someone said, what about Antarctica? Okay, fine. There isn't a country on earth inhabited by humans that has never had a Jewish community. As far as I know, anyway. Certainly every continent. North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, that's not even a continent, everywhere. Miktzei haaretz v'ad ktzei haaretz, from one end of the world to the other. Uvagoyim ahem lo targia. You won't be able to relax wherever you go. V'lo yiyeh manoach lechaf raglecha. You won't be able to settle down. Some of you went to Poland, maybe all of you went to Poland, I don't know, and you saw this there too. You saw what that means. Places where they thought we could settle down. They claim that when Jews first came to Poland in the 15th century, they called it Polania. And they said, oh, I know why it's called Polania. Polanya. Here's where God sleeps. This is like Gan Eden, this place. It was a beautiful country, lots of green, and the Jews were welcomed in there in the beginning in Poland. And if you went to Poland, you saw what they built there. You saw the Bate Knesset, the life they had, and you saw how it all came to an end. And that's just one story. Same story everywhere else. It's in the Torah. 22, 28, or 3,500 years ago, it was written. But the story doesn't end there. The story continues. Here's the parak we spoke about earlier with Mark Twain. And then, here, this is the psukim we read before. Okay. Now we get to this. Parak Lamed. I want to just tell you before I read this pasuk, I showed you before the picture of Machane Yehuda. You can think of that if you want. You can think about the streets of Katamon outside of TVA. I think of Alon Shvut. This is where I live. And once in a while, you've all been to Alon Shvut. You've probably been to our shul, where Shani davens and I daven. Maybe you've also been to the other shul in the old neighborhood where Tamara davens. In that shul, in the old neighborhood, you can look out and see something called Derech HaAvot. I don't know if you've all been to Derech HaAvot or not, but outside of Alon Shvut, there's an ancient road that we imagine, we think, is the road that Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov walked on. That's why it's called Derech Avot. And I tell people sometimes, I want to dramatize this a little bit, that if I, from time to time, need a little chizuk emunah, if I need to remind myself why I believe in the Torah, so I go to shul. I probably should go to shul to daven, but I go there and I also do something else. And especially if I go to that shul, because there I can look out the window also. I've been living in this town almost 23 years. I know most of the people here. I walk into shul, I look around the room, and I start counting countries and continents. How many different countries are represented in this room by Jews who were born in those countries? And if I go back to where their parents were born, if they were born in Israel, let's say. Right? Like I was just talking to my neighbor over here. He was born in Yerushalayim, but his father's from Yemen, from Teiman. His father made Aliyah on camel and foot in 1920 something. Okay? So I look around the room, and I'm usually able to get, if the shul's full enough, I'm usually able to get all the continents. The people from North America, all over the United States, of course, in Canada. The people from South America. We have people, just in this one little yeshuv here, we have people from Argentina, and there's a woman who was born in Venezuela. We have people from Brazil. We have people from Peru. So we have North and South America. All over Europe, of course. England, there's someone from Denmark, there's someone from Holland, there's some people from France. A lot of people from France, not a lot, but a bunch. There's a guy from Switzerland, someone from Italy, Eastern Europe as well, Russia, which also includes Asia. And we have people also, we have at least one person who was born in India, from the name Menashe. And we have people from Africa, of course, South Africa, but also Ethiopia. We have people from Australia, the whole world. And then I read these psukim. I think also about the kind of things we talked about at Chatzar Kinneret, the first people came back from Europe. After all of that, says Hashem. And again, these words were also written thousands of years ago, and also today they're history. You will start to, something will stir inside of you while you're still in exile. You will return to Hashem with all your heart and all your soul. Two prakim ago, I said I was going to scatter you. I'm going to scatter you from one end of the world to the other. And now it says, Hashem will come back and will gather you. He will gather you. He will gather you from all of those nations. And here's why I look around the room and I look at the guy from Ethiopia standing next to the guy from Canada and the guy from Denmark and the guy from South Africa and Australia. In Yehiyeh Nidachacha b'ktzei hashamayim, says the next pasuk, if you're all the way at the furthest ends of the earth, Misham, from there yikabetzcha Hashem Elokecha. Umisham yikachecha, from there Hashem will get you. From there He will find you. He'll bring you all back to where? Words that were later accurate in Yechezkel that we read earlier. Ve'aviacha Hashem Elokecha el haaretz asher yarshu avotecha. He will bring you back not to Uganda or to New York. He will bring you back to the land that your ancestors inherited. And that's where I turn around and look out the window at Derech Avot, and I can see in my mind's eye Abraham and Yitzchak walking on the donkey on the way to the Akedah. It happened right here. And if we're wrong about the exact road, then it happened 500 meters in one direction or the other, or 1,000. So I'm reading psukim about after this crazy exile that we never should have survived, but that the Torah said 2 prakim ago we're going to survive. And then the Torah said, I will bring you back from all over the world, and I'll bring you back to the land that your ancestors inherited. And I look out the window and I'm standing there. And the next word says, Virishta, and you shall inherit it too. And then I look at the young man standing next to me who's wearing a green uniform that says Tzahal on it. And the Israeli flag flying outside. I don't have to believe Mashiach's going to come. It's happening. We're living through this. This makes no sense. You would have shown me this 200 years ago. I wouldn't have believed it either, probably. I don't know how our ancestors managed to believe it. I don't understand. I didn't live then. They had different challenges than we have, clearly. This might have, maybe other things were easier for them than they was for us. This must have been harder for them. I don't need to believe this is going to happen. I just open my eyes and I see it happen in front of me. Kibbutz galuyot, the ingathering of the exiles, which makes no rational sense, and the world is against it. And it's still happening. Nefesh B'Nefesh has flights lined up 1 a week from now to the end of the summer in the middle of Corona. Just got an email from a student of mine who's making Aliyah in a month with her family from New Jersey. So those psukim, the psukim in Yechezkel, there are others also. Make it clear to me that this process is well underway. We're independent. We're not even ruled by Goyim any longer. When I think about all the things that the Torah says are going to happen when Mashiach comes, so they're not all here yet. We don't have a Beit HaMikdash yet. We certainly don't have peace on earth yet. We don't even have all the Jews here yet. We have almost half of them, but not all of them yet. But I also lived through a lot of this. When I came here 35 years ago, came to the Gush for the first time when I was 19, this country looked holy. This country was I came to Israel in 1986 for the first time, Shana Aleph, to go learn in the Gush. It was a third world country. Couldn't get a telephone. You had to wait 2 years to get a phone in your apartment. And here in the Gush, if I wanted a slice of pizza, I had to go to Yerushalayim, which took 45 minutes because there was no, those tunnels that you're familiar with didn't exist. And today, it's just mind-boggling. But that's not the point. The point is this is exactly what the Torah and later the Nevi'im said was going to happen. So to me, therefore, it's clear. It's happening. And it's happening in what's called Medinat Yisrael. And therefore, we have to support Medinat Yisrael, and we have to try to help Jews make Aliyah, and we have to try to strengthen the country. We have to keep everything going and contribute to this process so that the process can reach its conclusion. Simple. Right? Simple, right? I convinced you? I convinced myself. Okay, there is another side. And there are problems with what I said. I want to talk to you about next week, but I have 1 more minute now. Does anyone want to raise any problems or challenges or questions against what I said, or did I do such a good job of brainwashing you that you can't see them? Or did I just convince you because it's so true?
Would anyone say that, because the first people who came back to Israel and rebuilt it weren't necessarily religious, then it's not really fulfilling the now when you if you listen to the mitzvah, then you'll get the land back?
I read this pasuk, but I didn't comment on it, and nobody mentioned that this pasuk, right? This pasuk clearly says here. What does it say here? I read pasuk Aleph, and I read through pasuk Bet, and I started talking about pasuk Gimel. Pasuk Aleph says after all these things happen, the whole exile. Pasuk Bet says you will return to God and follow His commandments. B'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha. And then Hashem will come and gather you back. And I said, look, it's happening. But I didn't point out the fact that this pasuk doesn't seem to have been fulfilled, at least not completely, and not only in the beginning. Not only in the beginning where many of the people, not only non-religious, but anti-religious, dafka in those kibbutzim, by the way, that we were speaking about, dafka. A lot of them were anti-religious. in a big way. But today also, the state of Israel is far from a country that observes halacha in its fullest sense. Not at all. The vast majority of what percentage of Am Yisrael unfortunately observes Torah and Mitzvot? And what percentage of Am Yisrael keeps Shabbat? Eats only kosher food? That's one of the problems that I conveniently did not discuss, but that needs to be discussed. There's at least one other big problem also, and that is if you look at, and those who didn't learn the Rambam with me, so which I guess is everybody here. Oh, Aviva did. If you think about last week's conversation was about a different group that also claimed Mashiach was here, and that group, by the way, completely denies what I'm saying here. Chabad Hasidim are very supportive of Israel, but very against this. Very, very against the idea that this is Mashiach. But what do they talk about that we religious Zionists are not talking about?
Like one person coming.
Yeah, they have a person. He happens to be dead. That's the problem with what they're saying. But they have a person. He wasn't. At one point, he was alive, right? They have a person who they say, this is the Mashiach. I'm telling you, Yemot Mashiach. Where's the Mashiach? I'm telling you, look, all these Nevuah. Where's the Mashiach who's supposed to be doing these things? Who is he? And if he was around in the 1880s at Chatzar Kinneret, he's probably not alive now. And if he's alive now, he wasn't alive then. And so how can this be Mashiach? Okay, two questions.
Things take time.
What was that?
Things take time.
But where's the Mashiach? If I'm telling you not that the Mashiach is going to come in the future, I'm telling you that the nevuos of the Mashiach are happening now.
Yeah, you said that
The Rambam,
Mashiach, you're saying in the times, meaning that it's going to take a while. You know, we have to first get there. I mean, this is what.
Okay, but if we look at the Rambam, maybe next week we'll look at the Rambam again. And maybe we don't have to accept the Rambam on this point. That's maybe one of the answers. I don't know. But the Rambam talks about believing in the Melech HaMashiach who's going to do all these things. The Melech HaMashiach, says the Rambam, is the one who's going to bring the Jews back to Israel. And the Rambam says if you don't believe in that Melech HaMashiach, you're denying the Torah because the Torah himself says he's going to come. And the psukim the Rambam quotes are these. So according to the Rambam, at least, these psukim are supposed to be brought about through the work of this Melech. And I'm telling you, so Chabad people had the person, but he didn't do the things, and they had to read it very creatively to say that maybe he was doing the things he's supposed to do. And then he died without finishing it, so now they have to talk about either he's not dead, or he's coming back from the dead, or whatever. I'm telling you, he was a great man. He wasn't Mashiach, but it's happening anyway, and where's the Mashiach who's supposed to be doing it? Okay, so now I gave away that. I still believe everything I said before, but it is more complicated, and we'll talk about it next week. Okay? Next week I'll be on the time that's on the schedule, which is at 2 p.m. New York time, not the earliest slot that I made, because I have to go to a wedding. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leach out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice to see you all.